Why avoidants are addicted to you after no contact. Let's be real for a second. Human behavior is predictable. Patterns don't lie. And if you've ever been in a relationship with someone who's avoidant, someone who pulls away, keeps you at arm's length, fears closeness, then you know the frustration, the push and pull, the emotional roller coaster. But here's the game changer. When you pull away, when you go into no contact, they start chasing. Why? Because that's how their psychology is wired. And once you understand this, you own the game. So listen up. This is not about playing games or manipulating people. This is about understanding human nature so you can step into your power instead of being controlled by someone else's emotional inconsistency. People value what they can't have. It's a fundamental truth of human nature, deeply wired into our psychology. When something is abundant, easily accessible, or constantly available, it loses its perceived worth. Think about it. When you have unlimited access to something, you stop appreciating it. It becomes background noise. But when something is scarce, limited, or taken away, the mind starts fixating on it. This principle applies to money, opportunities, rare collectibles, and yes, relationships. Avoidant people, by their very nature, are drawn to independence. They fear engulfment, emotional overwhelm, or losing their sense of self in a relationship. That's why when you are consistently available, responsive, and emotionally open, they tend to detach. It's not because they don't care. It's because their subconscious mind associates closeness with a loss of control. The more you are there, the more they take your presence for granted. It's not intentional or malicious. It's simply how their attachment system operates. However, the moment you remove yourself from the equation, everything shifts. Suddenly, what was once taken for granted is now missing. Your texts, your calls, your attention, all of it is gone. The person who once felt overwhelmed by closeness is now experiencing an entirely new discomfort, your absence. And that discomfort starts working against the very defense mechanism they relied on to keep you at a distance. Think about how the human brain reacts to deprivation. If you eat the same food every day, you might get bored of it. But if suddenly that food is no longer available, you start craving it. You remember how good it was. You miss the taste, the texture, the experience. It's the same in relationships. When you are available, the avoidant partner's mind subconsciously categorizes you as a constant, something always there, something predictable. But once you're gone, that perception is shattered. Your presence is no longer a given. Now it's a loss. And human beings react far more intensely to losing something than they do to simply having it. Avoidants might not respond immediately. They may even seem unaffected at first. But over time, as the reality of your absence settles in, their mind starts recalibrating. The dynamic they once controlled is no longer in their hands. They used to be able to pull away knowing you'd always be there. But now they're left wondering why you aren't chasing, why you aren't reaching out, why you aren't trying to fix things. And that wondering creates a powerful internal conflict that pulls them toward you. It's not about playing games or manipulation. It's about recognizing that true value is created through boundaries and self-respect. When you stop overgiving, overexplaining, and overproving your worth, you naturally become more attractive. Not just to an avoidant partner, but to anyone. Because people who value themselves command respect. They don't beg for attention. They don't settle for one-sided relationships. And when someone with an avoidant attachment style senses that they might actually be losing you for good, their attachment system flips. They feel the impact of your absence more deeply than they ever felt your presence. What's happening here is simple. The avoidance mind is shifting from a place of security to a place of uncertainty. Before, they knew they had you. Now they're unsure. And that uncertainty is what triggers the feeling of loss. Instead of you being the one anxiously wondering where you stand, they are now the ones experiencing doubt. And when people start doubting, they start chasing clarity. They seek reassurance. They want to know if they still matter. This is why no contact works so effectively in these dynamics. It interrupts the cycle of pursuit and withdrawal, forcing the avoidant partner to experience what they have been avoiding. Emotional connection and the fear of losing it. Our brains are wired to seek certainty. We crave predictability because it gives us a sense of control over our lives, our relationships, and our emotions. But what happens when something suddenly becomes uncertain? What happens when we're left without closure, without answers, without knowing what's coming next? We become obsessed. We fixate. We replay scenarios in our minds trying to make sense of what went wrong, what we missed, and what we need to do to regain control. This is exactly what happens when an avoidant partner is met with no contact. The moment you stop reaching out, stop trying to fix things, stop making yourself available, you create emotional uncertainty in their mind. They were used to you being there. They were used to being able to predict your behavior. They knew that no matter how much they pulled away, you would always be there, waiting, reaching, trying. That certainty allowed them to feel safe in their avoidance. But when you remove yourself from the dynamic, you break that predictability. At first, they might feel relief. Avoidance needs space, and they often feel overwhelmed by emotional closeness. So when you go silent, they might initially tell themselves, good, I finally have the space I need. But as time goes on, something interesting happens. Their mind starts to wander. Why haven't they reached out? Why are they suddenly so distant? Are they moving on? These questions begin to loop in their subconscious, and suddenly they're experiencing something they never expected. Uncertainty about you. Uncertainty is a powerful force in human psychology. It triggers the same neural pathways in the brain that are linked to addiction. Think about the last time you were waiting for a text from someone you really cared about. Every minute that passed without a response made you check your phone. You started overanalyzing, you couldn't focus. The simple act of waiting created a deep psychological response, making you want that message even more. Now apply that same principle to an avoidant person who is suddenly experiencing the absence of someone they assumed would always be there. The more time that passes, the more their brain starts to fill in the gaps. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by your presence, they now feel consumed by your absence. The person who once felt in control now feels out of control. The person who once felt distant now feels drawn in. And it's all because the certainty they relied on no longer exists. This emotional uncertainty creates a powerful internal shift. The avoidant person starts to crave the very thing they once pushed away. Their mind starts seeking closure, understanding, and reassurance. They start remembering the good times. They start questioning whether they made a mistake. And the moment those thoughts take root, the obsession begins. They check your social media. They wonder if you're thinking about them. They debate reaching out. They feel an unfamiliar discomfort, the feeling of not knowing where they stand with you. And here's the key. People chase what they can't figure out. When someone feels they have you figured out, they stop feeling urgency. But when they feel uncertain, that urgency spikes. This is why no contact is so powerful. It forces the avoidant to sit in the unknown. It forces them to feel the emotions they've been avoiding. It forces them to experience the very discomfort they once made you feel. It's important to note that this isn't about manipulation or playing games. This is about allowing the natural balance of human psychology to work in your favor. You're not punishing them. You're not seeking revenge. You're simply creating the space necessary for them to experience what it feels like to not have you. And in that space, their mind does all the work for you, because when people face uncertainty, they seek resolution, and more often than not, that resolution leads them right back to you. When you chase someone who is avoidant, they instinctively pull away. It's not because they don't care, but because their subconscious wiring makes them feel threatened by too much emotional closeness. They equate intimacy with a loss of independence, and when you push for connection, their natural response is to retreat. It's frustrating, but it's also predictable. However, what happens when you stop chasing? What happens when you mirror their behavior instead of resisting it? The dynamic shifts completely. People are naturally drawn to what is uncertain and unfamiliar. When you were chasing them, they knew exactly where you stood. They had full certainty that you wanted them, that you would always be there, that no matter how much they pulled away, you would still be in pursuit. That certainty allowed them to feel comfortable keeping their distance. They didn't need to evaluate their emotions because they were never at risk of losing you. But when you mirror their actions, when you also pull back, stop initiating, stop trying to break through their walls, they suddenly find themselves in unfamiliar territory. The control they once had over the situation disappears. They're no longer the ones deciding when and how to engage. Instead, they're experiencing their own medicine. The very same emotional distance they used to create space is now being used against them. The emotional distance they use to make you aware of themselves is growing against, and guess what? They don't like it. When you stop reaching out, they start wondering. When you stop chasing, they start noticing. When you stop trying to fix things, they start questioning. They go from feeling in control to feeling uncertain, and uncertainty is a powerful psychological trigger. The moment they start questioning your absence, they begin to experience something they never had to deal with before, the fear of losing you. Mirroring is powerful because it forces an avoidant to face their own emotional patterns. When they pulled away before, they did so with the belief that you would still be there waiting. But now that you're gone, they're left with their own thoughts, their own emotions, and a growing sense of discomfort. Instead of having the luxury of space without consequence, they now have to confront what that space actually feels like. In relationships, people take on different roles. When one person is the pursuer and the other is the distancer, the pattern becomes predictable. But when the pursuer suddenly stops, when the person who was once always reaching out suddenly disappears, the distancer feels the shift. They feel the absence. They feel the loss of control. And in many cases, they begin to react in ways they never expected. This is why after no contact, avoidants often come back, not because they had some grand realization overnight, but because they are now feeling the very thing they were avoiding, emotional discomfort. They start to see you differently. The certainty they once had about you has vanished, and in its place is curiosity, anxiety, and a growing need to reconnect. They may not understand why they feel this way, but they will feel it. And when people feel something deeply enough, they take action. By mirroring their behavior, you're not manipulating them, you're showing them what it feels like to be on the receiving end of emotional distance. You're shifting the dynamic in a way that forces them to experience what they put you through, and in doing so, you create the very thing that makes people crave connection, mystery, uncertainty, and the fear of loss. The moment they feel like they might actually lose you is the moment they start wanting you back. Not because you begged, not because you convinced them, but because you did the one thing they never expected: you stopped trying. Avoidant individuals crave independence. They associate closeness with pressure and emotional overwhelm, and they instinctively pull away when they feel that their freedom is at risk. This behavior isn't always a conscious choice. It's a deeply ingrained response that has been shaped by their past experiences, fears, and attachment style. When someone consistently reaches out, checks in, and tries to bridge the emotional gap, the avoidant person feels suffocated. Their mind interprets the connection as something that threatens their sense of autonomy, and in response, they create distance to regain a feeling of control. However, the moment you step away, something unexpected happens. They finally get the space they thought they wanted, and at first, it feels good. The pressure is gone. They're no longer feeling pursued or emotionally obligated. They may even convince themselves that they're better off without the relationship. But as time passes, the reality of that space begins to settle in, and it doesn't feel as freeing as they imagine. When you stop reaching out, they are no longer reacting to the perceived pressure of closeness. Instead, they are left alone with their thoughts. They no longer have the distraction of pushing someone away or managing their emotional defenses. Instead, they begin to notice the absence of what was once there. That absence creates a shift in their perception. Rather than feeling relieved, they begin to feel something new, a sense of loss. This is where the paradox of freedom comes into play. While avoidants fear emotional closeness, they also fear being alone. They want connection, but on their own terms. They desire love, but without the fear of being consumed by it. When you were present, they felt suffocated, but now that you're gone, they experience something unexpected: a lack of control. Before, they had the power to pull away whenever they wanted. They controlled the pace of the relationship. But when you stop engaging, when you remove yourself from the equation, they are no longer in charge of the dynamic. They don't get to decide when and how the relationship moves forward anymore because you've stepped back entirely. That shift from being in control to being uncertain creates a sense of discomfort they were not prepared for. Humans tend to romanticize the past when something is no longer available to them. When avoidants experience space, they begin to remember the good times more than the bad. They recall the warmth, the support, the connection. The very things they once pushed away start to feel desirable. And because you are no longer actively trying to prove your worth or maintain the relationship, they begin to wonder if they misjudged the situation. This is why many avoidants return after no contact. It's not always an immediate reaction. It happens gradually as their mind starts to adjust to your absence. At first, they may feel fine, but then, as time goes on, they start to notice the lack of your presence. They check their phone and realize you haven't messaged. They see something that reminds them of you, and for the first time in a long time, they feel something unexpected, a longing to reconnect. What's critical here is that this shift happens naturally. You are not forcing them to miss you. You are not manipulating them into wanting you back. You are simply allowing them to experience the consequences of their own actions. By giving them what they said they wanted, you are allowing them to come to their own realization about what they truly need. And in many cases, that realization leads them right back to you. Not because you chased, not because you begged, but because you did the one thing that changes everything. You let them feel the reality of your absence. Avoidants are wired to avoid emotional intensity, yet they are not immune to the effects of emotional memory. Every interaction, every shared moment, every inside joke, these things don't just disappear. Even when they distance themselves, those experiences remain imprinted in their subconscious. They may convince themselves that they are fine, that they have successfully moved on, but emotional memories have a way of creeping back in, especially when they're no longer being fed new interactions with you. When you were present in their life, they didn't need to reflect. You were there, available, predictable. Even if things were difficult, they didn't have to confront what life would be like without you because they still had you in some form. But when you go silent, when no contact begins, their mind starts replaying the past in a different way. Without new experiences to shape their perception, their memory begins to filter and shift. And one of the most fascinating aspects of human psychology is that people tend to remember emotions more than facts. They might not recall every conversation, but they will remember how you made them feel. They might not remember all the arguments, but they will recall the warmth of your presence. They might not consciously acknowledge missing you at first, but when they experience a moment that reminds them of something you shared, the emotional imprint resurfaces. And here's the key. Emotional memories become stronger in the absence of new emotional input. When an avoidant is actively distracted, whether through work, hobbies, or even dating someone new, they might suppress these emotional imprints. But the moment they find themselves alone with nothing to distract them, those memories begin to take hold. Could be a song, a certain scent, a phrase someone else says. It doesn't take much for the mind to retrieve stored emotions. And because they are no longer interacting with you, their mind starts to idealize the past. This is why avoidants often come back long after you've stopped trying. While you are reaching out, checking in, or showing availability, they felt in control. They could push you away knowing you were still there. But now, they don't know what you're thinking, where you are, or how you feel. That mystery activates curiosity, a curiosity that leads them to revisit those emotional memories in a way they never had to before. And here's another important aspect. The mind dislikes unfinished business. When someone disappears without drama, without anger, without making a scene, it leaves a gap in the brain's natural storytelling process. The human mind wants to close loops, to resolve narratives, to make sense of things. When an avoidant pulls away and you respond with silence instead of resistance, their subconscious is left with a story that doesn't have a satisfying ending. That lack of closure amplifies their need to understand, to seek resolution, to reconnect. At first, these thoughts might come as fleeting moments, passing reminders of you, but as time goes on, they become more persistent. The emotional memories resurface more frequently. They start to realize that they don't actually feel as free as they thought they would. In fact, they feel the opposite, a sense of something missing. This process is slow, but it's powerful. And the longer you stay in no contact, the stronger these emotional memories become. You are no longer reinforcing their perception of you as someone always available, always chasing. Instead, you have become an open loop in their mind, an unresolved emotional experience that demands their attention. And as time passes, that attention turns into longing. That longing turns into curiosity. And that curiosity turns into action. Avoidants are often unaware of their own emotional patterns. They spend so much time suppressing their feelings, avoiding deep emotional connections, and prioritizing their independence that they rarely pause to reflect on how their actions impact their relationships. When they pull away, they do so because it feels safe, because emotional closeness triggers something uncomfortable in them, whether it's fear of engulfment, fear of dependency, or simply fear of vulnerability. They assume that distance will give them relief, that space will make everything feel lighter. But when you go no contact, something unexpected happens. The space they thought they wanted begins to feel different. It's no longer about escaping emotional overwhelm. It becomes an absence they can't quite explain. And this shift is what forces an avoidant to truly process their emotions for the first time. Avoidants rarely confront their feelings in real time. When something emotional happens, their instinct is to suppress, rationalize, or distract themselves. They use logic to explain their choices, telling themselves that relationships are too complicated, that they need space, that they don't want to be tied down. They keep themselves busy with work, hobbies, or even casual relationships to avoid sitting with uncomfortable emotions. But when you step away completely, the distractions start to lose their power. They might try to convince themselves that they're fine, that your absence doesn't affect them. And in the short term, they might even believe it. But the mind doesn't just erase attachments, it processes them over time. And since they no longer have the external distraction of your presence, they are left with only their internal emotions. At first, they might feel relief. No more pressure, no more expectations. But then, as days and weeks pass, something shifts. There's a moment, maybe small at first, when they realize that their world feels different without you in it. A song comes on that reminds them of a moment you shared. They go to a place you once visited together, and suddenly it feels emptier. They experience a problem, and for the first time, they can't instinctively turn to you for support. These seemingly insignificant moments start to build up, and without realizing it, they are feeling things they never allowed themselves to feel before, because no contact isn't just about you disappearing, it's about breaking a cycle. When you were always available, they never had to fully process what your presence meant to them. They never had to experience what life would be like without you. But now, with your silence, they are forced to do the one thing they spent so long avoiding: sit with their emotions. This is when the internal conflict begins. Avoidants rely on a belief system that tells them relationships are burdensome, that they need space, that they don't need emotional closeness to be happy. But now their own mind is contradicting them. They start to realize that they don't actually feel as free as they thought they would. Instead, they feel a growing discomfort, a void they didn't anticipate. And this discomfort forces them to reflect. They start questioning, did I make the right choice? Why do I keep thinking about them? Why does it feel like something is missing? These thoughts become more persistent, and for many avoidants, this is the first time they truly acknowledge their own emotions instead of suppressing them. It doesn't always happen overnight. Some avoidants take longer than others to process these feelings, but the key is that no contact creates the space for this internal shift to happen. By removing yourself completely, you allow their mind to naturally work through the emotions they never confronted before. You aren't forcing them to miss you. You are allowing them to experience the reality of your absence. And in that space, their suppressed emotions finally surface, leading them to the one realization they never expected to have. They actually care more than they ever admitted. At the core of human psychology lies a simple truth. People value what they believe they might lose. Avoidants may push love away, but they are not immune to emotional connections. They convince themselves that space will bring relief, that distance is necessary, but what they don't anticipate is the power of absence. When you stop chasing, stop proving, stop giving them a guaranteed presence, you create something they are not used to. Uncertainty. And uncertainty breeds curiosity, longing, and the realization that maybe, just maybe, they made a mistake. No contact is not about manipulation. It's not about playing games or trying to make someone suffer. It's about reclaiming your power. It's about recognizing that you deserve a connection that is mutual, that you are not someone's emotional safety net while they figure out their own fears. By stepping away, you give both yourself and the avoidant person the opportunity to see things clearly, and in that silence, in that space, the truth reveals itself. Whether they come back or not, one thing is certain. You will never again have to question your worth because you will have proven to yourself that you are enough with or without them. Thank you for taking this journey with me today. If there's one thing I want you to walk away with, it's this. You have more power than you think. The way people treat you is often a reflection of what you allow, and by stepping back, by holding your ground, you are not only shifting the dynamic, but also showing yourself the respect you deserve. For those of you who have struggled with avoidant relationships, I see you. I know the pain, the confusion, the frustration, but know this. Every time you choose yourself, every time you refuse to chase, you are setting a new standard for the kind of love you will accept. Thank you for showing up for yourself today. Thank you for being open to a new perspective. And most of all, thank you for remembering that your presence is valuable and the right person will always recognize that. Keep moving forward. Keep standing in your power. You are stronger than you realize.